They were called the Scorpion Unit in Memphis, Tennessee. And what does Scorpion stand for? It stands for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace. Memphis police said the Scorpion team would be tackling violent crime in the city. Scorpion was an acronym for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods. At the time, MPD, or the Memphis Police Department brass, told WREG the unit was comprised of three parts: crime suppression, auto theft, and gang activity. I'm Tyrone Bowman. This is Tyrone Bowman Tonight. Muscle cars, balaclavas, and fists. How the Scorpions rolled through Memphis. Residents say the street crime unit was an intimidating and sometimes violent presence in the city. 5 Scorpion officers were charged with murdering Tyree Nichols during an arrest. I'm Tyrone Bowman. This is Tyrone Bowman Tonight, according to an article written in the New York Times. For 14 months, officers from the high-profile Scorpion unit of the Memphis Police Department patrolled city streets with an air of menace, zooming up on targets, jumping out of their Dodge Chargers at a dead run, shouting at people to get out of their vehicles, lie down on the ground. They did it to Demisio Wilborn, 28, and his brother as they pulled up to an apartment building last February. They surrounded Datavius Collier, 32, as he went to buy beer for his father in May. And last month, they beat Monterius Harris, 22, outside an apartment complex where he said he was waiting to spend time with his cousin. These and other Scorpion encounters typically began over something minor: a tinted window violation, a seatbelt infraction, a broken taillight, or cracked windshield, and often resulted in officers finding illegal drugs, unregistered weapons, stolen cars, and outstanding warrants. Their tactics could be aggressive, according to interview and records, with arrestees being subdued by baton, pepper spray, taser, and the brute force of the officers' fists. Mr. Wilborn said that the Scorpion officers threw him against the car. They chased and eventually pepper sprayed a frightened Mr. Collier in the face. And when officers pulled Mr. Harris out of his car, he said they beat him so severely that he was left with cuts and a black eye. 3 days after Mr. Harris's arrest on June 7, several of the same officers involved would go on to swarm Tyree Nichols, pulling him from his car and kicking and beating the 29-year-old amateur photographer with a baton as he begged them to let him go home. He later died at the hospital. In some quarters of the city, Mr. Nichols' death was shocking, but it was not a surprise, even as city officials credited Scorpion officers with bringing down violent crime. Their presence had spread fear in the predominantly low-income neighborhoods where they patrolled, and records show that black men were overwhelmingly their targets. Since its formation in November 2021, the specialized squad of some 40 officers that was deployed to deter violence in some of the city's most troubled neighborhoods was responsible for repeated acts of intimidation, harassment, and violence by some of its officers, according to interviews with dozens of people in the community, including several arrested by the unit's officers. Police out here riding around like hound dogs, said Loretta Johnson-Ray, whose family members wound up in a violent encounter with the unit's officers after running from them last summer. The Scorpion unit was terrorizing the city, Ms. Ray said, and Mr. Nichols' death was not the first time that they be beating on people. It was the first time that they messed up. Young black men have disproportionately borne the brunt of the Scorpion operations. A New York Times review of arrest affidavits in about 150 of what are estimated to be thousands of cases handled by the unit suggest that the unit's tactics appeared to rely heavily on the vehicular equivalent of stop and frisk, a tactic that civil rights advocates say can drive racial profiling and put people of color at risk of police violence. In the sample reviewed by the Times, about 90% of those arrested by the unit were black, much higher than the share of the city's population that is black. About 65%. Black residents across Memphis were 3 times as likely as white residents to be subjected to physical force by police officers, according to department data over the past 7 years. The uses of force, according to those interviewed, were not always minor. Some said they were left bloodied and bruised. One man, his lawyer said, suffered a busted jaw. 2 of the officers charged in Mr. Nichols' death have been disciplined previously after using force and failing to submit the required documentation on how it was used, according to personal files. In one of those cases, a woman reported being beaten by officers and slammed against a patrol car. To city officials, the arrests and seizures that the Scorpions tallied on a near-daily basis signaled that the unit was achieving its mission in a city that had endured more than 300 homicides in 2021, a record. The city began touting the Scorpions' hundreds of arrests, its seizures of scores of drugs, guns, vehicles, and cash, with Memphis police noting on Facebook the unit's role in high-profile cases, often posting photos of items that officers had confiscated. So, we'll talk about the death of Tyre Nichols for a moment. As it's been reported, 5 Memphis police officers have been charged in the death of Tyre Nichols, and all 5 were black men. So Tyre Nichols, African American, after a traffic stop escalated into a brutal beating, an alleged traffic stop. So the Scorpion unit, as I said, the specialized street crime unit, one of several that U.S. cities have assembled to fight a new surge in crime, was disbanded after 5 of its officers were charged with murder in Mr. Nichols' death. So after the officers beat Mr. Nichols, one of them took a picture of him, handcuffed and bloodied, and texted to at least 5 people, according to documents that detailed the officers' actions. An official police report written hours after the beating of Mr. Nichols offered a starkly different account of police violence than what videos had shown. A Times investigation into the officers accused of killing Mr. Nichols revealed the challenges of preventing police brutality. Police have really changed and modified what they're doing under the Scorpion. Mayor Jim Strickland said in a televised interview on January 11th, the day after Mr. Nichols died, while crediting the unit with helping reduce homicides in the city, it is a team they have really directed at that. Now, the prosecutors are going to have to review every single case, every single arrest, every single charge. Within a few weeks, the Scorpion unit would be disbanded and 5 officers charged in the killing of Mr. Nichols, a case that has sparked national outrage and renewed discussion about the use of specialized crime-fighting units in neighborhoods that are often home to low-income families and people of color. The Memphis Police Department did not respond to queries about the Scorpion's past arrests and on the training and policies that govern the unit's operations. The department has not disclosed records of past citizen complaints against the unit. Many of the Scorpion officers remain on the force, and it is unclear how many operated with the aggressive tactics that arrestees detailed in interviews. Michaeline Esther Thomas, a member of the city council, said she did not hear about the volatile encounters people had with the Scorpion unit until after Mr. Nichols' death. I just wish we would have known sooner, she said. She also expressed concern about the unit's apparent focus on stopping people with minor violations and said she would be proposing a prohibition on traffic stops for issues such as a missing brake light or late registration. The dissolution of the Scorpion unit was just the beginning of addressing a larger problem, said Amber Sherman, a community organizer who led recent protests. We want a disbandment of every special task force, Ms. Sherman said. The police have long used such units to over-criminalize low-income, poor black neighborhoods and to terrorize citizens, she added. We want that ended. Residents could spot Scorpion teams by their cars, sometimes marked police cars, but often a pack of several unmarked Dodge Chargers driving in a straight line. Mike Schroll, a defense lawyer who has had several clients arrested by the unit, said the problem was the officers' often heavy-handed tactics. Some of his clients said they were beaten, including the man with the busted jaw, and the perception that the Scorpions often seem to be looking for trouble. If they pull you over and nothing is happening, they'll create something, Mr. Scroll said. In an encounter after encounter, Memphis residents said the Scorpions had a similar playbook. Officers would spot some minor infraction, jump out and begin asking questions and barking commands. Some said the officers offered no explanation about what they had done wrong, leading to confusion and sometimes disobedience. Some of those interviewed said they had tried to run away, in part, out of pure fear. I was terrified, really, because the way they pulled up, Mr. Wilborn said of his encounter with Scorpion officers on February 19th, 2022. They could have been anybody. They didn't announce themselves or anything. They didn't turn any sirens on, any lights or anything. Mr. Wilborn said he and his brother Romelio Hendricks, an aspiring rapper, were preparing to meet friends to shoot a music video and were just getting their recording equipment out of the Infinity when they were cornered by a line of Chargers. 2 officers jumped out, the brother said, demanding to know what they were doing at the apartment complex. Moments later, Mr. Wilborn said an officer threw him against the Infinity and more officers surrounded him. One mentioned smelling marijuana. When they searched the car, they found an ounce of marijuana and a loaded pistol, which Mr. Hendricks said was a legally obtained weapon he had brought for protection. People out here are crazy, tried to steal your car. They know I go to work and probably have something, he said. Mr. Hendricks was arrested on gun and drug charges. Mr. Wilborn received a citation for possession of a controlled substance. All charges against the brothers were eventually dropped, which they said bolstered their argument that they should have never been stopped. The Shelby County District Attorney's Office confirmed that the marijuana case had been dropped. Mr. Hendricks had a very small amount of marijuana. He made a charitable donation to the charity of his choice, and the case was dismissed, said Erica R. Williams, a spokeswoman for the office. Mr. Harris, who was arrested last month, said he was also in a parking lot when a group of Scorpion officers in balaclavas and hoodies suddenly surrounded his car, yelling at him to get out and threatening to shoot him. I was scared, like terrified, he said. I didn't see any signs of security or police or anything. The men punched him and threw him to the ground, injuring his face. Mr. Harris said he believed his screams for help, which prompted several people to emerge from a nearby apartment complex, kept the incident from getting worse. The police and court records said Mr. Harris had driven rapidly at officers before backing away. Mr. Harris said he had been maneuvering to park his car. He was arrested for possession of marijuana, a charge his lawyer denies, and a handgun, which Mr. Harris said belonged to his cousin. It was only later, he said, after Mr. Nichols' death, that he read the news account and realized that the officers charged in that case were the same ones who had arrested him. To be continued. I'm Tyrone Bowman. Never surrender. Never quit.